Okay, let's pick up with this concept of a monetary regime. A monetary regime. The Federal Reserve, we said, is a quasi-public, quasi-private institution. It's private when it wants to be private, and it's kind of public and governmental when it wants to be public and governmental. And that's why it's a very central banks are very unusual creatures inside an economy. And one of the jobs of the Fed, one of their stated jobs, according to the legislation that created them, is to regulate the economy, regulate the commercial banks and how much money they can loan by controlling their reserves, regulating the interest rate, the Fed funds rate, through the discount rate, and to maximize full employment. We want a growing economy with no unemployment, and doing all of those things at the same time can be a bit tough. It can be quite a challenge. Now, sometimes, since they're human beings and can be influenced by politics, supposedly they're immune from politics, but the president still does appoint them and can put political pressure on them, and presidents have put political pressure, jawboning pressure on the Fed. And if the economy is running well, then all praise to the Fed. They're doing a wonderful job, and the reason you have a job is because the Fed's controlling the economy and making sure it's at full employment through its monetary policy. But then if you don't have a job, well, then that sword cuts both ways. Who's at fault? Well, I guess the Fed's at fault because they're supposed to make sure the economy's operating at full potential output, and they're not doing it. So they better get on the job and do that, and sometimes they can overreact. They can react to political pressures. It's very well known that the Fed will do just about everything it can possibly do to keep the economy from going into a deep recession, depression during a presidential election year, because that, if they don't, it tends to show political bias. If the economy is going fairly well, then they tend to leave the incumbent alone. But if the economy is terrible, well, let's throw that president out and put a new president in there, as though the president can control the economy through fiscal policy, which is not really the way it works at all. But that public perception is different from reality. So the Fed wants to play this, we're kind of political neutral game, but we really have to make sure that the economy is going forward regardless of the president or the makeup of Congress, because that's our legislative requirement. Now, if they overdo it and overshoot it, then they go from expansionary monetary policy to, oops, we overdid it, it's going too far, we're going to have to do some contractionary monetary policy. And maybe, did you ever ride with someone in a car and you're in the passenger seat and they like to talk to you while they're driving, or they like to mess with the radio or whatever it is, and they get distracted talking to you or messing with the dials on the radio or the stations or whatever it is, and they, without really knowing it, when they're doing all this, they go from 70 miles an hour all the way down to about 50 miles an hour on Route 71 or something like that. They look up, oh, everybody's passing like crazy, oh, they speed way up, and then they're really going, oh, I'm going to 85. Oops, I got to really slow it down here. And as they're slowing it down, they're playing, talking to you, and they're all back to 55 again. I mean, speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. Have you ever ridden with anybody like that? No, you never ride with, you've never had that whiplash sort of thing. I mean, they just can't keep it at, would you please get something and call it, what is that? Cruise control. If you just put it on cruise control, right? Life would be simpler for everybody. Yeah, I have had an experience with some friends of mine in college that everything was more important than driving. And no, I will not go get a hamburger with you if you drive, period. I'll drive, I'll go. But if you're driving, I'm not going. Now, this overdoing it, overcorrecting phenomenon is somewhat obvious, and when the Fed does that, it makes life for business people extremely difficult, because now they have to second guess, is the Fed going to be able to control it and get us up to full employment, or are they going to drive us into inflation? Or are we going to go into a recession, and how long? And the Fed isn't omniscient. It's guessing at all this stuff. Now, ideally, we saw in the past, ideally, according to an advocate like Milton Friedman, the Fed should increase the money supply at exactly the same average increase in productivity so that we don't get any price inflation. Remember when we did that $4 for apples illustration in class? If we do that, we can get this economy moving forward with new money stimulus, but you don't want to overstimulate the economy, because then you got to do this overcorrection thing, and then you're under correction, and then it goes back and forth. You know what? It would be simpler, and it would probably help business people and the economy as a whole, that even if we're going into an inflation, we're not going to really cut back dramatically. We're just going to stay on course. And even if we're in a recession, we're not going to really goose the economy to get it going. We're just going to have a steady growth, just steady growth. In which case, we could take these board of governors who decide this monetary policy of injecting money into the economy or taking money out of the economy to contract or expand the economy. What we would do is we could get a bunch of trained monkeys. A bunch of trained monkeys that would just do the same thing every time. Fact is, we really wouldn't need trained monkeys. We could put it on autopilot or cruise control. And no matter what happens, we're better off if we don't overreact. And there's always this tendency to overreact due to political pressure or presidential pressure or whatever. So in order to not overreact, the concept called a monetary regime was suggested by Milton Friedman. And a monetary regime is to basically put the Fed's policies on autopilot or cruise control or something mechanical, so that it doesn't have the human tendency to overact and overreact. And that concept is called a monetary regime. Now we're going to pick up with about the final topic today of a yield curve and operation twists in our next session.